This is the DawgNation postgame show, live from the UGA Bookstore in Athens. Brought to you by Kroger, R.S. Andrews, Jittery Joe's Coffee, Sir Gerald's, J. Stein Law Firm, and the UGA Bookstore. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into the DawgNation postgame show. We're live here at the UGA Bookstore tonight, where Georgia has gotten a win over UAB and run its record now to 4-0 as it gets ready to go on the road next Saturday for the first time here in the 2023 season at Auburn next Saturday night. So we're to talk here for the next few minutes about everything that we just saw. Georgia, at least on the beginning drive of the game, getting off to a much faster start. Here live at the UGA Bookstore, we talked about, we heard Kirby Smart talking about that with his interview on television a moment ago, saying that was a real goal to the team tonight, and they wanted to do that. They came out, they struck quickly on an opening touchdown. Admittedly, after that, there were some hiccups. There was some friction. Georgia gets off to a very quick touchdown, the 7-0 lead, but soon after that kind of found itself giving up a couple of touchdowns. At halftime, the lead was just 28-14. Certainly not nearly as large as you perhaps would have hoped it would have been if you're a Georgia fan, but when it's all said and done, Georgia does pull away. They get a big victory tonight, and a lot of this was really propelled by Brock Bowers. Tonight on our show, we're going to celebrate Bowers a lot. 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. What a performance it was for him. Also, if you're coming by to see us here at the UGA Bookstore, we'll give you a chance to be on the show live. You want to talk some Georgia football, you got a chance to do that here today. If you want to join us via Zoom, there's a link you can click into on any of our platforms, Facebook or YouTube or at DawgNation.com. Link to click into right there, and you can jump in there and be a part of the conversation there as well. Want to hear what you feel like a Georgia win tonight kind of looked like? Georgia obviously shaking off some injuries, a little bit of the kind of the halftime doldrums. But when it's all said and done, Georgia got a chance to, as the broadcaster said on TV a moment ago, kind of get right a little bit as it looks to go on the road in SEC play next Saturday. So we're talking about all that here on the show here today, including your Zoom calls coming up. So click to the link, be a part of the conversation. We will talk about these dogs getting to 4-0, and we'll also address some of the other big games that have happened around the country here today. I believe we also have a couple of Georgia. Yeah, look at here. Tony Fanchi is here. How about that? Tony Fanchi here today. Hey, big part of our DawgNation event. Come on over here, guys. So we can squeeze a few more folks in here. Yeah. So, Tony, give me your thoughts initially, and we'll do this all night long with people who want to join us via Zoom and anything else. Tony, give me your thoughts initially on how you thought this game played out tonight.
Well, obviously a little slow start again. The defense, they seem to struggle, but that was a very mobile quarterback on UAB side, so I know they had a hard time, chasing them down, but they kept the pressure on them. But obviously, as usual, the offense got clicking, and we had some great plays there. Too many turnovers. Hopefully that's something we're going to work on a little bit. But overall, a great game.
Yeah, one of the things to keep in mind, too, is Georgia's obviously playing through injury on both sides of the ball. One of the key defenders, obviously, that I think the Georgia fans have very high expectations for this season, Mikael Williams, he wasn't playing tonight. Difficult to tell how much of some of the issues with giving up a couple touchdowns that you don't typically expect this Georgia team to give up, how much of that might be related to the fact that Williams wasn't playing at all. And it did seem like Georgia was substituting pretty liberally here tonight. A little bit hard for me to tell, personnel-wise, what Georgia had in the game on a couple of those touchdowns.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've had some injuries these last few weeks, and I'm sure that played a role in it. They probably wanted to rest some people up also, and make sure they're ready to go for the Auburn game, coming up. So hopefully we will, get to where we can get a fast start next week. And go Dogs.
And by the way, Tony's got his DawgNation Duck Hunt shirt on from last year's game against Oregon. We got some other Georgia fans here, too. Tell us your name.
Michael Peace.
Michael, good to have you here. What's your name?
Susan Peace.
Susan, nice to have you here there as well. Michael, what did you think about the game tonight?
Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. Susan, how about you? How'd you feel about what you saw from Georgia?
Like Tony said, they were slow out the gate. They're just horrible. I'm sorry. I love my dogs, but come on. Don't wait for the halftime, chew out. Do it from the start.
No, I think that's fair, and I think a lot of Georgia fans will probably agree with what you guys had to say there. Listen, we appreciate you coming on, being a part of the show. Thanks for having you here at the UGA Bookstore. Thanks so much. Great to have you all here. And, of course, like everybody else, you guys can join this and be a part of that conversation today, just like everybody else did. Yeah, if you want to pop on, say hello to somebody, we'll certainly give you a chance to do that. Thank you all for being with us here tonight.
Great DawgNation.
There you go. Hey, listen, Roger. Hey, thank you so much, Roger. We certainly appreciate that, and you appreciate you being a part of the broadcast here today. We've got another Georgia fan who's going to pop over, be a part of our conversation. We certainly appreciate that. Hello, sir. How are you doing? Tell us your name and tell us what you thought about the game tonight. What's your name?
Morris Rich. I'm from Orlando.
Yeah, Morris. Morris is so. One of the things that's cool about what we get a chance to do here is I see all these names commenting on YouTube or Facebook or DawgNation.com, and I see the names all the time. And oftentimes I kind of wonder. I wonder what the person behind this looks like. Well, Morris is a regular commenter on our DawgNation. Is it Facebook, right?
Yep.
And then sometimes DawgNation.com. That's exactly right.
Sons. That's what we came for the UAB game because from Orlando.
Yeah.
So we went, and it was great being a night game.
Yeah, great. The lights look great. The crowd was great.
I was a little frustrated, the way the game went, parts of it.
Yeah, I understand that.
You understand. You know where I'm coming from.
To me, and I said this, Morris, on Twitter a little earlier, or I guess you call it X now, it's kind of a weird year for me because after tonight, that's 4 regular season games. That is technically speaking 1/3 of the regular season that's now over. And in some respects, I sort of still feel like we're waiting for this year to kind of start. It feels like we haven't seen Georgia yet firing on all cylinders. I think tonight was certainly a lot more good than not, and I think that Georgia probably built some confidence tonight that it can take with it to Auburn next week, even if this was kind of an imperfect game. And yet in the midst of that, you still had some things. We've had folks mentioning, well, after scoring the initial touchdown, the game was far closer at halftime than it probably should have been. Georgia had some turnovers. It wasn't a perfect game, but was perhaps a step in the right direction for you.
Yeah, I still don't have the confidence that I did have last year, with the team. So
I understand that. So maybe that's a product of the schedule. Who knows? But Morris, we appreciate you coming by and being part of the show. Appreciate your participation in everything we do here around DawgNation. I tell you, one of the best things about what I get a chance to do here is great Georgia fans that I get a chance to interact with, whether it's somebody like, the folks we talked to a little earlier, or Morris right there, Tony, who was here, who's been a part of our DawgNation cruise and some of that kind of stuff. And this is not a plug for the DawgNation cruise, but I will say it this way, that if you ever get a chance to do something like that, we really feel like we probably get to know each other better on some of those long-range cruise type things than maybe just a regular DawgNation event where we're only here for a little bit of time. So that's good stuff. Pop over here, and you can be a part of the show live on a video there as well. Click that Zoom link. You can join the show. William Camacho, you're next up here on our DawgNation post-game show here live from the UGA Bookstore. William, what'd you think about UGA tonight?
Well, I have to say they started off slow, but they started clicking on all cylinders. I mean, Carson was certainly in his A game, and Brock Bowers, finally. But anyway, it was a good performance, and I hope and pray that we get our players back from injuries because we're getting into that meat of the schedule. So anyway, thanks for having me on. Go Dogs.
William, it's a great go Dogs to right back to you, William. I think you bring up a couple of really good points that are important to get to. We're a few minutes into the show. We really haven't talked enough yet about the fact that Brock Bowers was showcased. I believe tonight was a reminder that he is the very best player in the country. And I think you got to harp on just how badly Georgia needed this here tonight. When we saw the team come out on the field today for, warm-ups and to begin the game, and you realized – Kendall Milton was in street clothes. He had on his jersey, but just regular pants. He had no pads on. He was not planning on playing. Roderick Robinson was not dressed. He was not planning on playing. When you realized, once again, Ladd McConkey, of course, not playing, you realized how short, staffed Georgia was going to be on the offensive side of the ball, and you knew that even in a game like UAB, there were going to be extra duties for playmakers like Brock Bowers. And a lot of Georgia fans have been just kind of wanting to showcase Bowers anyway to kind of give folks a reminder of just how good he really is. That is kind of the purpose that tonight served. He got 120 yards, got a couple touchdowns. Kind of a weird irony that in 2 career games against UAB, he's absolutely torched the Blazers. Of course, he torches almost everybody. But really big game against UAB in September of 2021. Huge game here against UAB in September of 2023. And I just think it was really fun to see some of the highlight moves from Bauer, shoving a guy, just almost into the stands at one point in time, showing his flexibility to make folks miss. He's just such an amazing player and such an amazing athlete. And I just think a night like this, his competitive fire kind of comes through in such a big way. I thought tonight was a real tale of just how good of a football player Brock Bowers is, and I love to see it. And the other point that William brings up, and I think you got to take this really seriously, is this is a Georgia team right now that's just dealing with a lot of injuries. And there had been some rumblings and some grumblings, some whispers that Georgia might even be more shorthanded today than we were kind of expecting Georgia to be. There might be some unexpected absences here, and perhaps Kendall Milton is kind of one of those, maybe, just based on some of the chatter. Maybe that's not too unexpected, but certainly Mikael Williams on the defensive side of the ball, that's an example of that. Javon Bullard wasn't dressed tonight at all. Probably not necessarily unexpected, but another example of kind of some of the injury stuff that Georgia's dealing with. And I think at a certain point, and of course, Georgia's not going to use this as an excuse. Let's keep that in mind. But at a certain point, you have to acknowledge the degree to which these injuries are piling up for Georgia here right now. Georgia desperately needs guys to get healthy, especially in some of these spots where you see clusters of injuries. That's kind of the situation at running back right now, for instance. Perhaps you maybe got some good news. It seems like tonight, based on kind of just the visuals, looks like Lawson Lucky's getting a little closer to being ready. That's perhaps some good news here. But this is a Georgia team that needs to get healthy. So keep that in mind in the evaluation that you perhaps have for Georgia tonight. And you're free to share your opinion, whatever it might be. Certainly we'll be candid here on our DawgNation postgame show as we typically are. But keep in mind that maybe tonight for Georgia, job one as much as anything else was they wanted to get out of this game with no longer of an injury list than it already was as they look to go on the road in the SEC next week. Our next commenter here on our DawgNation postgame show is Ryan Walker. Ryan always has great things to say after games. Ryan, what did you think about this Georgia win tonight?
First off, what's going on, DawgNation? It's nice to be 4-0 for right now, but BA, I'm not going to be as complimentary as you think tonight. I'm going to keep it real. Let's call it for what it is.
Okay.
Carson Beck, 22 out of 32 passes, 337 yards, 3 touchdowns. Really should have had more. You overthrow Jackson Meeks. You put one in the hands of Arian Smith. He had drops. Dominique Lovett had drops. They've got to start holding on to the football when it comes to this passing game, because when we get into SEC play, he's not going to have a chance to miss shots like that, and guys are not going to be able to drop passes like that. That's what I have for that. But other than that, he had a solid game, coming out slinging the ball around, no turnovers, which was key. He almost had a pick, but thank God that didn't happen. Dejon Edwards does what he does. Little Terrell Davis, 2 touchdowns, did his thing. Brock Bowers, we don't have to talk about it. I'm going to say this about the defense. We gave up too many points. The guy that's supposed to be the leader of this defense, Jamon Dumas Johnson, Pops, he's got to stop chasing guys, and he's got to know where he's got to go. You're the middle linebacker. You're the leader of this defense. Start finding the football and start making plays. Dan Jackson, he's got to get better. You're the last line of defense as a safety. You got to start making more tackles and quit getting shaken out of your shoes. Dylan Everett, he got to sit down. He's been getting beat like somebody took his like he owes somebody some money. But I'd like to see more Nyland Green. I think we can improve defensively once we get these injuries down, but we've got to build depth, and these guys have to get better if we're going to defend this third national championship. Get this third national championship. But, I just got to be honest with you. We won. I'm happy about that. But it's so many things that we have to clean up coming up to this season. And also, we just can't shoot ourselves in the foot with bad penalties or whatnot. We've got to become more disciplined. But, Kirby is 80, got his 85th win today. Goes past Nick Saban. He's doing his thing. It's a beautiful thing that we are winning, but we've got to find out ways to be more dominant coming up during this season, because SEC play is not going to get any easier. That's all I got for you tonight.
Ryan, by the way, I love the old school Falcons pennants in the background behind you. Those look great. Good stuff from Ryan Walker as a part of our DawgNation postgame show here tonight, and I think a lot of what he says is pretty fair. I mean, I think there are a lot of Georgia fans that are going to say, hey, we were hoping for a little bit more, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I think some of that probably deserves a little closer examination. Ryan says, hey, I'm not quite so sure about this guy. I wouldn't mind seeing a little bit more of that guy. And I think that Georgia right now is also in the midst of kind of trying to figure out what its best 11 is here at the moment. Obviously, Mikael Williams not being there tonight, that makes a big impact on the defense. That is, of course, true. But, we saw a couple of touchdowns, including a red zone rushing touchdown last week to South Carolina. You talk about 21 total points scored tonight, really the 14 points in the first half. This thus far has not quite been the Georgia defense as we've come to expect it. I was doing a radio interview this morning in Atlanta, and I was asked, hey, what's the one thing you kind of know is sort of a dominant unit for Georgia here right now? And my response was, I still believe this is the best defense in the country. Well, the truth is while that can still be true, and I still assume that it probably eventually will be true, Georgia through this kind of first third of the regular season has not really shown that yet. You saw tonight a game involving Notre Dame and Ohio State where both those defense really showed up to, frankly, play pretty well. So in the category of best defense in the country, Buckeyes playing more defense right now than they have. Michigan is sort of thought to have a really good defense too. Maybe some of that's just by virtue of the teams that it's been playing, but nonetheless, by reputation, that's supposed to be a pretty good defense there as well. That the challenge for Georgia, kind of meeting its own standard defensively and meeting the standard of the best overall unit in college football, there's clearly some work to be done to get from where it is now to where it has a chance to be. Now, I still sort of feel like it's going to get there eventually. I mean, tonight, the comparison I might make with this UAB game is what we perhaps saw last week, or I should say last year, when Kent State came in here. Now, that was Sean Lewis as a play caller. That's probably a completely different animal, one of the bright coaching minds and bright play calling minds, Lewis for Kent State a year ago. But that's a game in which Georgia gave up far more points than you would kind of expect it to do. Tonight sort of feels like that. The one big difference, though, and this is something we have harped on, the one big difference, though, is that when Georgia gave up more points than you would expect against Kent State, or perhaps didn't score as much against Samford, or whatever else might have gone on, Georgia did that after having completely decimated Oregon, scoring in its first 7 possessions to win 49-3, and then obviously going on the road to kill South Carolina. We haven't quite seen that big, firm, validating performance as of yet that would give you confidence in the midst of some of those games in which, Georgia perhaps just wasn't playing its best. So it feels like if that moment is going to come, if Georgia has that kind of punctuation mark performance where it really demonstrates exactly what it is, as opposed to coming at the beginning of the regular season like it did a year ago, a lot of that stuff's going to come much later in the year, and obviously Georgia fans hope that it does get here eventually. The other thing that Ryan brings up that I'm happy to kind of mention here is Kirby Smart did coach his 100th game as UGA's head coach today, and now by getting his 85th win gives him the most wins of any coach in SEC history through 100 games, and I don't think that can be overlooked. I think that's a remarkable total, surpassing the figure from Nick Saban at Alabama, but obviously in Kirby's case, these are his first 100 games ever as a head coach. So as we mentioned on DawgNation Daily one day last week, that's a milestone that you got to pay close attention to. Kirby kind of putting himself in the historic category here through 100 games as a head coach. Cassie Turner now, great commenter, typically on YouTube, joins us here live now as a part of our DawgNation post-game show. Cassie, tell us what you thought about the game tonight, and of course, we are always glad to have you on the show.
I'm always glad to be on the show. Thank you. I thought that this game gave me a lot of promise for what this team can be. I saw some really, really good glimpses of some really good plays that if they work on their injuries and they work on not dropping the ball when they're returning the kick, that'd be great. But I saw a lot of good glimpses of what the team can be and very much improved from the last few weeks, but still a lot to work on.
Cassie, I think that's a great call, and I appreciate you being here. And along the lines of what Cassie said there about maybe you want to take some positive from this and you want to, kind of look at some things that maybe give you hope for what Georgia can be. One of the things that Kirby Smart, I believe, is going to probably say in his post-game press conference, because he said this in the TV interview that he just did a few minutes ago, is they really wanted to make sure they came out fast. They wanted to make sure they came out fast. And they marched down the field and took a 7-0 lead very quickly here in this game. Now, some Georgia fans may nitpick that and say, yeah, but what happened after that? All of a sudden it's, 7-7, and then eventually it's 28-14. So the totality of the first half, as one of our live commenters mentioned a moment ago, the totality of the first half kind of feels like, But from Georgia's standpoint, at least what Kirby Smart said on TV, I'm presuming he'll also say this in his post-game press conference. We'll try to let you hear some of that here coming up in just a moment. I think Kirby Smart's going to say they at least achieved that goal of wanting to make sure that they did not have an opening drive that didn't result in points. And Smart last week at one point said that when it comes to the overall slow starts, that it hasn't necessarily been a slow start from like a yardage standpoint. Georgia's been gaining yards and kind of marching down the field. It just hasn't been necessarily finishing those drives off with points, which is another thing tonight that's worth noting. And if you want to go back to Cassie saying, hey, I saw some stuff that made me feel more confident about what Georgia can be, I think one of the other things that Cassie might have added to that, and perhaps this was on her mind, Georgia, I believe, in 6 red zone trips tonight had 6 touchdowns. I believe that's the overall number. 6 red zone trips, 6 touchdowns. That's clearly correcting a little bit of a blemish that had been on Georgia's resume prior to that. So, Cassie, it's a great call. Let's go out to Frank Montanaro. Frank, good to have you on the show. Make sure you unmute yourself so everybody can hear you. Frank, we appreciate you being with us here late on a Saturday night. What is your thought about this Georgia win over UAB?
I was definitely happy to get the win. I was very happy to see Brock finally get going, to see that connection made. I mean, what his first 2 touchdowns of the year, coming in a little bit late, but definitely glad to see the win. At certain times, I think what we're looking at as Georgia fans is we've been spoiled for the past few years. So even for me, it's kind of hard to try and separate this defensive team from the historic defensive teams that we've had the past couple of years. So it's just not going to be the same. And things have to adjust, and we do have players that are injured. But, if you look at what are we really expecting as Georgia fans? I mean, you look at last year, we're beating Missouri 26-22. Even though Auburn was closer, but 42-10, Florida 42-20, Tennessee was only 27-13, Mississippi State 45-19. We're seeing similar score gaps right now, and fans are kind of freaking out a little bit and saying, oh, we're not blowing people out, but, we are at the end of the day getting the job done. We'd like to see it done a little bit cleaner, not as many turnovers, but I think, we got to really see what we're going to match up coming here in SEC play for the next several weeks, and then we'll kind of really get a better feel. But I'd like to come out blazing from the start. Consistency doesn't have to be, I need 21 points in the quarter, but we've got to be consistently getting those scores and taking advantage and finishing off drives.
Frank, it's a great call, and I certainly appreciate that. I think you bring up a lot of good points. I want to run through a few of those here, if you don't mind. First of all, I totally agree with what you say about Brock Bowers. Tonight, not only did Georgia probably need a little bit more from Bowers because of how banged up it was offensively and because this was an offense in need of a little bit of a confidence boost. Tonight was probably one of those nights you needed more from Bowers. But in addition to that, this is also one of those guys that we would certainly believe this is Georgia's last year with Bowers. The Bowers, I think, is going to be a top 5 pick come April. And so this is your last chance to use him. And I think one of the things that's been fun about the last few months, especially during the summer when a lot of the talking season stuff is taking place, I think we finally saw Bowers kind of get the recognition that he deserved. And I think going to SEC Media Days probably helped him with that. I think he got a little bit more media attention than, that kind of helped just elevate who he is as a player. Now, Bowers doesn't care about any of this. He'd be more than happy to kind of just sort of exist in the shadows. He doesn't need a lot of attention, but I do believe it's appropriate for those of us who kind of do the media stuff and, for those of you who are participating in social media and, kind of out there online expressing your opinions, our conversation ought to reflect like the historical stuff we see happening in front of us. And Bowers is one of the best players that's ever played at Georgia and, frankly, the best player, I believe, in college football here right now. And so when Georgia has a chance to showcase him, not only does it help Georgia win a game like this tonight, but I think it also helps serve as that reminder of, gosh, this guy at Georgia that's technically by, how he's listed on the depth chart, a tight end, but he plays like the best wide receiver in the entire sport. And so I agree with what you bring up there, that tonight, by getting him in the end zone a couple of times, by getting him well over 100 yards, it just becomes that reminder again to everybody else of, Georgia's got a truly special player at the tight end position in Brock Bowers, and we only have, if we're Georgia fans, we would believe anyway, a handful of games left to enjoy him. And obviously tonight was one of those when you really get that sense of just exactly how special he truly is. Now, when you talk about some of the turnovers and things like that, obviously for Georgia tonight, some of that kind of centered in on the special teams. And this is another one of those areas in which we just expect Georgia to be stellar. We expect nothing but the best, really, from Georgia across the board because that's the standard they've kind of set for themselves. But we've had a couple of issues here this year where we've noticed Georgia on a special team standpoint not quite being what it typically is. You go back to Woodring's field goal misses last week. Today, a couple of those turnovers happened via special teams. And on the final play of the first half, with Georgia already, kind of only nursing a 14-point lead, UAB had a shot from kind of deep in Georgia territory there on the final seconds of the half because of the turnover from Georgia on the kickoff after the UAB touchdown that had been scored prior to that. So we're not used to seeing special teams miscues from Georgia, but we certainly saw a few of those here tonight, and I've seen a couple of those here last week. A little bit troubling perhaps, and one of those things you would guess that Kirby Smart is definitely going to harp on when he gets a chance to speak to the reporters, but probably more importantly than that, when he has a chance to address his team directly, because you certainly don't want to go on the road next Saturday and give a struggling offense like Auburn. We're going to talk more about them in a moment. You don't want to give a struggling offense like Auburn a short field. If you do that, then that's going to be a far more dangerous situation than doing that with UAB here this evening. Next caller up is Isha. Isha, we appreciate you popping on here and being a part of our DawgNation postgame show. We're live at the UGA Bookstore. Wish you could be here with us, but the next best thing is to have you joining us via the Zoom call here. So, Isha, you've always got great comments. Give us some thoughts here on what you think, how it played out with Georgia tonight.
Well, hello, BA, and I wish I could be there. One year I might make it out there. But I know some people talked about, I caught the tail end of Ryan talking. I was a little late getting on the show, watching it on my phone. But anyway, the defense, if it ain't one thing, it's another. So it went from the offense being an issue to now we're looking at the defense. And once we play a complete game, I think everybody will be happy. But I think it was the scheme with the defense. I didn't like it, especially with the 3 down linemen. Most of the time, they went up there instead of putting 4 people on the line and then doing what you want to do after that. Just their positioning and stuff is just kind of causing some issues. They're changing up the scheme too much, and it allowed for some of those little passes to get through and him to have time. And I think the key to that is the injuries. With Bullet being out, I think they changed the scheme a little bit, and maybe a couple other ones. But with that scheme change, I can see it, because if you look at the scheme we had last year and beginning of this year, it's totally different. They lining up different. And they line up like that on more of a consistent basis. And then, like he said, Dumas Johnson be out of position a lot of times because he's reading that run and instead of looking at the tight end or running back that he's supposed to be carrying. And of course, the special teams. As far as I know, people been talking about a lot about the kicker and all that stuff. His mechanics is off. At this point blank. I'm just slowly watching him and some of these kicks, just the extra points. He got too much movement on his kicks. So that means your mechanics is off. And because his kicks is fluttering, it's never a straight kick. And that's why you have all that motion and stuff and you're missing kicks. We get that straight and somebody point that out to him, we might be more secure with that end. Other than that, the offense did great. We missed out on a couple of plays, and one was Arian Smith misjudged the ball, I guess, and then decided to slow up. But that was a touchdown to me, and just we got to get better. There's nobody playing perfect football in this game, because I'm watching all these games.
That's right.
And so, like, somebody say somebody should be number 1 or whatever. Ain't nobody playing perfect football. A lot of this stuff looks like garbage out here. So I wish everybody just calm down. Yeah, we got some stuff to fix, but just calm down and let them fix it.
I think it's a great call, Isha, and I always appreciate your perspective on all of this, and I think you bring up a lot of good points. The thing that you mentioned last, I think, is also really true here, too. You could say through 4 games, based on how Georgia played, perhaps it's somewhat vulnerable to lose its number 1 ranking. Most Georgia fans probably wouldn't care much about that right now anyway. It's the ranking at the end of the season that matters. But to Isha's point, okay, you could make the case, all right, drop Georgia in the rankings, I guess. That's happened. Georgia, has lost the number 1 ranking before. So, perhaps, there's an argument to be made. But you've got to make the argument for someone in place of Georgia. Now, I had predicted coming into the weekend that an Ohio State win would kind of give them some of that hype. But based on the way the Buckeyes played tonight, I don't know how much of that they're going to get. I mean, obviously, this is a better defensive team now than it has been before, at least based on what we have kind of seen and certainly saw tonight. Seems like they're a little bit better defensively. I know that one of the big motivating factors for Ohio State, it's really weird. In that Ohio State-Notre Dame game, it's a little bit of a replay of the Georgia-Alabama game from 2002 with Lou Holtz in the role of Pat Dye. Apparently, Lou Holtz going on the McAfee show saying that Ohio State's not physical and they can't beat anybody that's more physical than them, which is 100% true. Apparently that made Ohio State really mad, and they went out there and used that as motivation out against Notre Dame. Now, I would say to Ohio State, hey, don't brag to me about Notre Dame because they've never beaten anybody of note in one of these big games. So I'm not quite so sure you get a trophy for beating Notre Dame. But the point is, Ohio State would seem to be, because they did go on the road and win a game against a highly ranked team and certainly a very notable team in Notre Dame, that would seem to be the kind of team that, okay, well, maybe they get some hype and maybe they kind of replace, at least potentially, where Georgia's been at number one. But they only scored 17 points tonight, and Ryan Day had one of the worst play calls, near the goal line, near the end of the game, running a jet sweep that you're ever going to see. It seems like McCord right now is really struggling. It seems like they're having a hard time. I don't want to say struggling. That may be overstating it. But he's certainly not in keeping with what C.J. Stroud has been. They've had a little bit of a hard time getting the ball to wide receivers, it would appear. So I don't know, to Isha's point, as he said, I'm echoing what he said, I don't know right now that you can make a case for anybody being better than Georgia. You can make a case right now that Georgia through 4 games is not as good as it was through 4 games in either of the last 2 years. I'd probably listen to you on that. I think you'd probably have a little bit of evidence you could point to. But if you want to make a case right now that somebody is clearly, demonstrably, to use a bigger word than I probably should, better than UGA, I don't know if you can do much of that here right now. Not quite so sure. We're going to get back to your calls in a moment. I'll remind you that I'm also wearing this wonderful Peter Millar shirt tonight. It's got the old dog face logo, one of my favorite kind of classic old school Georgia logos. This is the kind of great apparel you can find down the first floor of the UGA bookstore. Such a great spot for us to be our home away from home when we're here in Athens. We have loved the UGA bookstore for a long time, so when you're leaving home games, walk across the stadium, come to the UGA bookstore, make sure you get yourself some great game day apparel for the rest of the season, because the biggest games to be played are going to be played in the coming weeks. You want to look good when they are played. So Peter Millar, Johnny O, Vineyard Vines, all the great famous makers that make that great-looking UGA apparel, you can find it all right here at the UGA bookstore, so make sure you check that out. Somebody who was checking out all the action tonight right there with me, I was actually back down in the field again. A little bit of an interesting vantage point to watch a game like this. Someone who's kind of always down there is our DawgNation's Jeff Sentell. Jeff, it's interesting to hear the opinions kind of flowing in tonight. Some folks saw some stuff tonight that they liked better than what they've seen in recent weeks from Georgia. There are others who are pointing to some things that they think are pretty significant concerns they want to see kind of cleaned up here as Georgia gets ready to go into SEC play, including on the road next week for the first time at Auburn. What was your overarching opinion of what you saw tonight, Jeff?
Well, I mean, good evening, everybody. Good, maybe early morning, what it feels like right now. But so for me, my kind of takeaways are, I just got out. I think Kirby Smart's just finishing up his press conference right now. I just got out of the post-game player press conference, and one of the things that struck me was Nazir Stackhouse, who basically talked about how the defense is different without Michael Williams, but then he immediately made a pivot to, well, it's sort of the same thing the team had to do last year when they were without Jalen Carter for a period. He said the defensive line wasn't at its best today without Michael. Said it was probably a C-plus game. And everybody's going to, I'm sure they've already done that on your show, Brennan. They've picked apart this game. They've, probably talked about the defense, talked about the short fields, talked about how UAB put up 336 yards of offense on a Georgia defense that hadn't taken too many warts. But I think my big first takeaway for this is I really thought Carson Beck took a step forward. Of course he's going to miss some throws. I'm sure everybody's pointed out that there's guys running wide open, but I hate to break some hearts here, but Stetson missed some throws. Every quarterback misses some throws. What Carson did to me was not so much how he had 3 touchdowns and he looked great all over the stat sheet, is he looked like a demonstrably much more efficient attacking quarterback. He played loose. He played free. He was slinging that ball around. And I thought 15 really took a big step forward tonight in an area where Georgia, I think, needed it to. another takeaway for me that goes through my mind is maybe something we were talking about this summer, Brandon. We might get through this whole season and not know what Georgia has. Maybe not even know what Georgia has until the SEC championship game, perhaps even after the SEC championship game. But I think I caught one of your points that you were making as I came on the show and was on hold. Is I don't think you can point to any team and say that team is playing better football right now with better personnel than Georgia. Sure, there's a handful of teams that probably belong in that top upper mix, but right now, after 4 games, I think sometimes fans kind of look at it and they say, is this the 2021 team incarnate? Is this the 2022 team incarnate? I don't think it's either one of those teams, Brandon. Like I said on your show at this very juncture last week, the only thing Georgia's got to compare itself to is the rest of the country right now. And I think that's still a pretty great comparison. Pretty fair comparison of where the Dogs look.
No, I think that's right, and I want to talk to you more about what you said about Carson Beck, because we really actually haven't talked about Carson a lot as of yet. First of all, the stat line is really pretty eye-popping, pretty big numbers there, and it could have been even bigger. On the deep throw to Jackson Meeks, that not connecting, I believe you probably blame Beck for that, probably an overthrow. On the deep attempt to Arian Smith, I believe you're going to, kind of have to unfortunately give Arian Smith a drop for that, and so that's not Beck. So big numbers from Beck all around, and yet the numbers could have been even bigger. I think for a lot of folks, they wanted to see that kind of breakout moment for Carson where he maybe fully gains all the confidence he needs in himself. The team kind of has that chance to rally around him. Terrence Edwards, the great former Georgia wide receiver, told us last week on DawgNation Daily that he thought that moment may have come second half last week against South Carolina. From your perspective, Jeff, did you see Carson bring some momentum from the last week's second half into tonight's game? Obviously, Georgia marched down the field, scored in the first possession. That's something that Kirby is pretty proud of when he spoke in his post-game interview on the field with the TV folks. But then the offense, kind of slowed down for a minute there in the first half. How much of the, second half success of South Carolina was carried over from a momentum standpoint into tonight's game, do you believe?
Well, I definitely, Brandon, I think he played with a lot more confidence, whether it was him finally getting enough reps. Remember, folks, this is, again, a quarterback that's starting, his first month into a starter in major college football for the number 1 team in the country. I think the thing I saw with Carson is it's an overplayed catchphrase in football. It's a sense of urgency, and you don't know if you want that with your quarterback, but I absolutely like the way Carson came out tonight. It was almost like he was playing with tempo. He was playing in a 4-minute drill, 3-minute drill. He was slinging the ball. I thought in the past he was kind of waiting, and he was kind of just like seeing what the defense gave him and maybe a little bit too patient to make a mistake. And this time it looked like he was going to go out there and just start carving the defense up. Of course, that's probably a level of confidence that you get from UAB versus an SEC program. But let me tell you what Nazir said, because I'd heard all this all summer and all fall about how Carson was dealing and how maybe he would start off in practices and in scrimmages, and all of a sudden he'd get hot, he'd start cooking. And I asked Nazir Stackhouse, I said, Nazir, was that the Carson Beck you saw in the summer and the fall when he really took control of this job? And he made an okay gesture with his finger, and he smiled really big. And Nazir's got one of those big, gregarious, over-the-top, could be a character in a Roger Rabbit movie type smiles, and he's like, that's my Carson. And he looked like he was enamored, in love with the way the quarterback played. He played confident. Let me tell you, in the post-game media scrum, people asked him about the ball to Jackson Meeks, and then they also asked him about the ball to Arian Smith. And his answer and tone and inflection was the same on both questions, Brandon. It was like, hey, man, that's football. You try your best. You try your best to make the play, and then you go on to the next play. You don't let that one affect the previous play. He just really shrugged it off, and he said, man, that's just football. You got to go out and you got to go play the next play. And for me, I just see him growing up a lot. And it's kind of weird to say that when he's been at Georgia since 2020. He's been a part of so many practices for Georgia, working his way into a playing time rotation as the starter. I really thought, now I even tweeted this out, I thought 15 took a step forward tonight. I love it how people are always like, hey, it's free country, everybody watches the game, they interpret it, they filter things a lot differently, and they can filter it any way they want to. But I think the way Carson played tonight was good for the future of Georgia. because he looked decisive. He looked like he was on the attack, and he looked like he was really the type of guy that you wanted running this offense tonight. Regardless of the opponent, he even got the questions tonight about, what about next week? What about going on the road in the SEC? And he still stayed the same, calm, cool, and collected, talking about going to play in Auburn. He had a big smile on his face, and he was talking about the next challenge the way he was talking about a read on a play or getting the ball in Brock's hands. He just seems really calm and collected, and just seems really I guess the way to say it is he seems like he's at peace with himself, and he seems like really confident in what he's doing right now for Georgia.
Couple quick things before we let you go, Jeff. Randy Mason on Facebook says he gives Georgia about a B- for tonight's game. I would probably give Georgia a solid B. I would not give him a B+, I don't believe. I might give him a tick higher than a B-, though. I may give him a solid B for the performance tonight if you want to do the kind of, report card grade style totality of performance. I'd give Georgia about a B. Facebook commenter says B-. Where would you stand on kind of an overall grade for the Georgia performance tonight?
Yeah, it's kind of funny how people want to grade, because Georgia continues grading after. I think there was probably a lot of time, Brandon. I don't know if Carson even played maybe one series into the fourth quarter. Maybe he played one series in the fourth quarter, if that. But when Carson left the game, the score was 42-14. And I think if the game stayed that way, or perhaps Georgia kept UAB at 42-14, maybe made it 49-14, I think people would start creeping into a solid B, maybe a B+ right there for the team. I think B is what works, especially because you had the defense kind of, I guess, wilted a little bit. The defense wasn't happy with the way it played. And it's funny, all the focus is on the offense and the starts. Georgia had 2 fumbles tonight, and they gave the ball away 2 times. One of them really set UAB up on a short field with the Mekhi Muse fumble. That's sort of the autopsy of some of those points when everybody starts looking at the box scores in the morning or starts listening to the national highlight shows tonight. They're going to go, oh, wow, Georgia got a little offense going, but they gave up a little bit more uncharacteristic points than Georgia normally does. I'm sure that's valid, but when you look at this game, you saw Georgia. I think the overlying theme I have is somehow Georgia doesn't look good, and somehow Georgia can take these games over and feel like they're in control of this game without playing its best football. Let me give you a point me and another media member noticed in the fourth quarter, and this is when Brock Vandegrift was running the offense, and you looked over there and you saw personnel, and you were like, goodness, Delp was on there. You saw so many good football players on there. You saw Andrew Paul in there. You saw Oscar Delp in there. You saw really good wideouts in there, and you were just like, how many teams in the FCC would kill for that number 2 offense right now? And the answer was a lot of them. There's a few teams that would take that whole number 2 offense for Georgia right now. I think the things you need to see Dominic Lovett maybe stop dropping a ball or 2. He needs to play at an all-SEC level for this offense to cook. Of course, we can't go a show without mentioning that, Georgia's offense could probably look a little bit better with Ladd McConkey in there. I would grant anybody that wants to make that opinion, but I think you're starting to see Ra come on a little bit more. Dominic Lovett. I mean, some of the reputation for Lovett coming over to Missouri, let's not kid ourselves, was that Lovett was a playmaker. Lovett was almost impossible to guard in space, but he would drop a ball every once in a while, and you're going to have to live with that oops play because there were so many more special plays in his wheelhouse. I think you're seeing a lot of that. I just think Georgia just needs a lot more consistency on offense. I mean, you could go to 19 whenever you wanted, and you can get some TNT. He looked back to his old self after maybe a couple of mortal games in a row against the Ball States and the UT Martins of the world. I think Georgia, after 4 games, I'd be curious where everybody puts the totality of Georgia so far after these first 4 games and where they think the program is at. I think it's a solid B+ as well, especially with dealing without a lot of pieces. No Dejon Edwards for a little bit. No Michael Williams tonight. No Ladd McConkey still. So there's a lot of things to kind of swirl in the gumbo right now. And I just think these games are important. Remember we talked about, Brandon, you needed a long runway for this team to start figuring some of this stuff out, figuring out some of the new faces. Let's not forget that Amarius Mims is not on the field, and they're working in a new starter tonight in Dylan Fairchild and a new rotation with Xavier Truss at tackle. So I think these are all pieces, and you're starting to hopefully see Georgia maybe Carson Beck makes a move forward tonight. Maybe somebody else next week at Auburn makes another step forward. Perhaps that's Ra Thomas. I think all these pieces are starting to come together, and Georgia certainly has the football team to wait on them.
All right, last thing for you, Jeff, and you mentioned number 19, Brock Bowers. I thought tonight was a reminder that Bowers is the best player in college football. I believe he's on the Mount Rushmore of Georgia players here all time. 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. He also goes over 2,000 yards receiving for a career here. Tonight reminded me of one of those nights when maybe you saw A.J. Green or Todd Gurley, one of these truly special players, kind of a highlight reel waiting to happen, where you're just always on guard for what they might do next. To me, that's just what Bowers kind of reminded me of tonight. I think it was good for Georgia to give him a showcase game. I think it came at a good time because Georgia clearly needed an offensive boost tonight with so many of the running backs injured and not playing, and perhaps the unit overall needing an extra dose of confidence. Bowers is certainly the one to provide you that. He had an outstanding game, and it's, to me, just a cool reminder of what a special player he's been, one of the all-time greats, and in what I believe is his final season, appropriate for us to all take a moment to appreciate just what kind of player he truly is.
Yeah, Brandon, you got me thinking. The sprinklers are going off right now at Dooley Field, and I got a lot of thoughts swirling. Now, one thing we do on, I know you do on your show, you give everybody a chance to speak. You don't try to sound too preachy, but at least you try to give a sermon. One of the things I'm never going to do is try to basically shove an opinion down someone's throat. But on this rare occasion, I want folks to stop and listen to this. I've noticed it a couple of times this year, and it's really special. I remember being a wee lad when Herschel Walker was running up and down this field. Maybe I was 4, 5, 6 years old. But I remember when Herschel touched the ball, every time he touched the ball, it was a roar. It was a pulse through the stadium. Of course, that happened sometimes with Todd Gurley, a lot of times with Todd Gurley. Same thing with A.J. Green. I think I heard you remember that name. I want folks to just kind of frame it up and just try to savor it this season in Sanford Stadium with Brock Bowers and this season with Brock Bowers. He is a very special football player. He even gets on the field. I don't think last week he practiced much at all, and he got onto the field, and he still tried to do the Brock Bowers things he normally does by wearing the cape. He's just a guy folks are going to be talking about 20, 30 years from now from when he played at Georgia. That's my belief there. And I think we all just need to take a second. Every time he does something special in Sanford, maybe for a half a second, don't think about the score. Don't think about how Georgia's looking. Don't think about the point spread and how much they need to win by so the nation or even a very interested fan base will think about how good the Dogs looked or didn't look. Just take a second, step back. It's some of those people that are concerts now that have their phones out recording everything and are not just savoring being in the moment. Savor being in the moment there with Brock Bowers. And think about this with Georgia. This is one last point I'll leave you with, Brandon. The run game currently is decimated, and I mean personnel. If I told you at the beginning of the game Georgia would have gotten through Game 4 with only 2 scholarship running backs. Brandon, I took a video this evening, of Dale McGee's running back room warming up. Man, it seemed like just a couple years ago there was Zamir White, there was Jace Cook, there was Branson Robinson, there was DeAndre Swift. There were players everywhere, second, third team. Brandon, I saw 2 scholarship running backs in that group. I think Dell had like 6 or 7 guys, 4, 5, 6 of them were walk-on. People didn't even know who number 41 was and all these other guys were. And Georgia's doing this kind of reinventing itself right now where every recruiting fan wanted to see Georgia throw the ball more so they could get more 5-star receivers. And Georgia would kind of maybe take a step away and pivot from that running back and just a ground and pound type football team. Well, they're currently a good pivot step away from, the old Georgia where you're just going to grind a team to death and ground and pound them in the second half. When Kirby Smart gets a good lead, he knows he's got to throw the ball around because those are where his best weapons are right now. But that's a depleted room right now. And when everybody wants to give out that B, give out that B-, and maybe you give them a B+, think about where the running back spot is right now and where the contributions have not really been. Dejon Edwards has been back for the last 2 games. If not, that number would look even more shallow right now. And somehow the Dogs are finding a way. Somehow the Dogs are finding a way to win these games. And that's something to kind of think about. That goes through my head right now at Sanford Stadium at 11:53 on a Saturday night.
All right, Jeff, good stuff. Thanks for being here. We appreciate your time, your insight on this game, and hope you have safe travels going back home. We'll look forward to talking to you again here very soon on part of our DawgNation post-game show as well.
All right, folks, we'll see you in Auburn next week.
Good stuff. Good stuff there from Jeff Sentell. Really appreciate his perspective. And speaking to Brock Bowers, who we spent some time talking about, Bowers is also, as you would imagine, our player of the game tonight, presented by the J. Stein Law Firm. Of course, Josh Stein and his entire team there as a part of the J. Stein Law Firm. We appreciate them being a part of our game day coverage here around DawgNation, including providing the player of the game for you. And what a night it was for Bowers. A couple of touchdowns, going over 2,000 yards for his career, and really giving Georgia the offensive boost that it needed tonight. We certainly congratulate Brock for that. Second time this year, I believe, he's brought home our Player of the Game award, and this one certainly quite deserving. And, of course, we appreciate the J. Stein Law Firm being a part of this there as well. We'll remind you that if you've been injured or someone you love has been injured in an accident, if it wasn't their fault and they need to be made whole, they need to be made right, our friends at the J. Stein Law Firm want to help you with that. And listen, a lot of these personal injury attorney firms, they may have thousands and thousands of clients, and perhaps you feel like you're just a number or a file. You're not getting the kind of personal attention that you want. Well, our friends Josh Stein and the J. Stein Law Firm, that's not going to be the case. They're going to give you the kind of small firm attention that you deserve to make sure your case gets the proper treatment that it deserves. That is what the J. Stein Law Firm is all about. Plus, Josh Stein is also a two-time graduate of the University of Georgia. We call those double dogs, including from the UGA Law School. So it's fun to kind of be a part of this with a dog. May not be a fun thing that you're going through, but a good dog fan helping out other dog fans, and that's what Josh Stein and the J. Stein Law Firm are all about. So find them online, jsteinlawfirm.com. That's jsteinlawfirm.com. All right, so we have a couple of folks we're going to get on hold. We'll get a couple of your calls here coming in, reacting to the Georgia win tonight against UAB. If we have time, we may also hear a little bit from Kirby Smart here, there as well. So why don't we do this first? Before we get our callers here, let's hear a little bit from Kirby, post-game press conference a moment ago, his initial thoughts on how this game played out. Let's hear a couple of minutes from Kirby there on that. Kirby Smart from the locker room here just a moment ago.
Well, like I always do, I'm going to give a lot of credit to the fans. I thought fourth home game in a row, great environment. I wondered, what the turnout would be, but I think the weather helped. It was rather electric down there on the field, especially to start the second half. I thought the atmosphere was really, really good for that. And proud of the hunger the team showed. I thought we're really aggressive and played faster, especially on offense, and just looked to be in rhythm a lot better. And really proud of those guys, 6 for 6 in the red area. Did a lot of things better. Could have played better on defense. I give UAB a lot of credit. They did a good job. The offensive coordinator, offensive line coach are good friends of mine, and they're really good football coaches, and they had a good plan there. But the score before the half probably hurt us the most. But I really was just proud of the way our guys played. So I thought we got better this week, and that's the goal. Like our hunger and our hungry theme for this week was be hungry and hungry to get better. Not just hungry to go beat somebody, but be hungry to get better. And I did think the players tried to get better this week.
Congratulations on a 100th win. I mean, that's the 85th win.
I wish it was 100 for 100.
Yeah. But it's a pretty good clip anyway. Was that acknowledged in any kind of way at the end of the game in the locker room?
Nah. On to the next, Chip. You know how that goes. It certainly takes an unbelievable organization, university, athletic department, President Moorhead, Greg, Josh. I mean, all the guys that have been involved in this program make our job much easier by supporting us. And the fans and the people that pay for the tickets and pay for the facilities. We wouldn't have 85 wins out of 100 if we didn't have the organization we have. I mean, the people I work with every day, from Jonas Jennings to Bryant Gant to Scott Sinclair, it's just incredible. So couldn't do that without all the people, including Claude.
Coach, what was the key to the turnaround in the red area this week?
I just think it just happens like that sometimes. I'd love to say it was a perfect call or a perfect play, but I mean, you don't ever control it early in the year. There's not enough opportunities to really measure it. So I told the players, I said, look, guys, all it takes is a 3 for 4, 6 for 10 in third downs, and all of a sudden you flip the script because there's just not a lot of data opportunities. And I thought we did that on offense tonight, 10 of 13 third down and 6 of 6 in the red area. So that'll get you well quick.
Coach, how have you seen Carson Beck's confidence grow over the past few weeks?
Well, I've never seen his confidence not grow. He's a confident kid. I think experience brings confidence, and he's gotten some experience, but he didn't lack confidence. That's just not his DNA.
I'm sure you'll want to watch the film, but first full game of that offensive line lineup, just general thoughts on how they look.
Very similar to.
Okay, so there
how
you
they
go. A
played.
little bit
I
of
thought
Kirby
they were
Smart,
good.
the post-game press conference. You actually go in a couple of minutes to the DawgNation YouTube page, and you will be able to watch the entirety of that press conference, getting a chance to hear from Kirby Smart as he reacts to that Georgia win. Georgia fans continue to react here, there as well. In the minutes that we have left, we want to try to squeeze in as many calls as we can because folks have been holding on, and we want to be respectful of folks' time, including Hugh Nash. Hugh, you've been waiting to be on the show, so we want to make sure we get to you here now. Georgia gets a win. Some folks see some stuff they like. Some folks see some stuff they think that Georgia still needs to work on. What was your overall takeaway from this Georgia victory tonight, Hugh?
Hey, BA. It's been a little while.
How are you, sir?
Well, between my good friend Ryan and Jeff, I don't have a whole lot of new things to add. I will say that I actually feel better after tonight with Carson Beck than I have yet. I mean, he seems to be getting more comfortable. And when Ladd comes back, I think he'll even be better. My concern is the defense, and it seems like we're missing some leadership. And, in the past few years, that pride that has been kind of handed down from each team is not there yet. Just holding people out of the end zone. You don't have the guy or two that's getting in people's faces on the field and on-field coaching. Maybe we'll have that soon, but I think we're missing that right now.
Hugh, I think that's a really good phone call, and I think some of the evidence that we're seeing on the field points to what you're saying perhaps being true. I'm looking at some of the stats here. Georgia gives up 86 yards rushing today, which is obviously not necessarily a terrible total, but it is more than Georgia averaged per game a year ago. And by the way, that's after 15 games of playing a national championship and a SEC championship with LSU and a Peach Bowl against Ohio State. Even after all of that, I believe Georgia last year allowed 77 yards per game on the ground. I think that was the number. And tonight against UAB, they are in excess of their season average per game from a year ago. They were over 100 yards allowed in the UT Martin game. They gave up the red zone touchdown on the ground in the first half against South Carolina last week. And so when Hugh says, I'm not quite so sure right now I see the same level of leadership on this Georgia defense, perhaps some of the results that we've seen would suggest that's possibly true. Now, it's also important to note that you have some pretty key absences. Javon Bullard not dressed out. We would say, based on the way that he's played and also based on the way that he speaks on behalf of this team, that Javon Bullard is among the most important leaders for Georgia. He's not there. Mikhail Williams may be just the overall pound-for-pound best player on the defense. Certainly last week against South Carolina suggests that could be true. He was not here. Kirby Smart letting us know after the game, and you can read more about this at DawgNation.com, that it was illness that Williams was dealing with. Had a suspicion that might be the case because we didn't see him at all. And it's a little bit tricky, especially for those who are like full-fledged reporters. I'm a little bit more of just sort of a loudmouth who shouts into a microphone. But like for full-fledged reporters, it's always a lot easier to confirm someone is at a game as opposed to someone not being there. But there was a little bit of chatter on the sidelines prior to the start of the game of, don't see Mikhail Williams. Do you see Mikhail Williams? Where's Mikhail Williams? Where's Mikhail Williams? Well, come to find out he was not there, and to my knowledge was not there at all. And that was kind of in keeping with what you might do with a player who was sick. Perhaps he was just too sick to be out there on the sideline, or perhaps dealing with the kind of illness that you maybe wanted to keep him away from other players if whatever he has perhaps is contagious, that you want to try to keep him away from other players there because of that. So him coming back would be a big deal. There had been a little bit of chatter that Georgia might be a little shorthanded today, even beyond what you maybe thought. And that is indeed what it ended up being there. So how much of the defensive performance today is kind of based on not quite having a full set of hands on deck? I think some of that's still yet to be determined, but obviously this is a group that needs to have a big performance next Saturday afternoon on the road at Auburn. Obviously the performance of the Auburn offense would certainly give you a lot of belief that this could be a big day for the Georgia defense, because Auburn's having a hard time moving the ball against anybody, and you'd certainly like to think that Georgia can continue to make it tough on Auburn next Saturday as well. Back to the phones we go again. Charlie Matthews next up here on our DawgNation postgame show. Charlie, thanks for being with us. Go ahead and give us your thoughts here. Final moments as Georgia gets a win, 49-21 over UAB. Charlie, what did you think about the game?
Hey, BA, it was a good game overall. The Dogs really came out second half and showed what they have. I did want to comment on the record. They said Coach Smart had the best record through 100 games of 85-15. And as you've said earlier this week, he's a rookie head coach. So I did the math. Steve Spurrier, through his first 100 games as a head coach, was 64-35-1. Bear Bryant was 67-27-6. And who's the other one? BA?
Saban. Nick Saban?
Was
Nick Saban?
Yeah, Nick Saban. Yep, 67-32-1. So King Kirby is definitely the best to do it. And I think our Dogs will play a complete game next week in Auburn. So looking forward to it. Thanks for taking the call, BA. Love you.
Man, Charlie, that is thank you, Charlie. I appreciate it. That is an outstanding level of research there, and really interesting that you want to go back to Steve Spurrier's first days as a head coach. Obviously not at Florida. He was a head coach prior to getting there. Nowhere near as successful as Kirby Smart has been in a much tougher environment here in the SEC and the University of Georgia. Same for Bear Bryant, who's first coaching. Was that A&M or was that Kentucky? Some of y'all, I'm probably showing my ignorance of what happened before I was born. But, kind of the A&M, the Kentucky era, I guess, as a head coach there for Bryant before getting to Alabama. Nowhere near as successful. The same thing for Nick Saban. You're talking about going back to his time at Michigan State and I guess, Toledo before that. Saban was a head coach there. Once again, nowhere near as successful. So I think it's important to note, and I'm so glad that Charlie brought this up the way that he did, that tonight was a historic night for Smart. Coaching 100th game, he said on TV a couple of minutes ago that one of the things that stands out to him is how quickly these 100 games have gone by. I would say if Smart feels that way, we probably feel that way on his behalf there as well. It does certainly seem like this has been an amazingly fast 100 games, but Smart, on the virtue of going 85-15 in his first 100 as a head coach, 2 national championships. Only a small handful of SEC coaches have won 2 national championships in that quick of a span to begin their coaching careers in the league. In his case, a coaching career overall. This is a historic career, and it is certainly not a huge stretch to think by the time it's done, and we believe he could have decades still to do this job if he wanted to. Certainly another 15, 20 years perhaps at least. That by the time it's all said and done, Smart could truly be mentioned among not just the all-time greats in college football, perhaps just the greats in coaching, period. Now, that's clearly a kind of a grandiose thing to say, but as Charlie pointed out with his numbers, on the virtue of how it's getting started here, obviously the sky is truly the limit. And I know all of us who are Georgia fans have enjoyed this so much. Clearly the last 2 national championship seasons have been amazing, but just the level of belief that he instilled in this Georgia program and in DawgNation, Georgia fans, from the moment he got here, truly, truly a special thing. Speaking of special things, you can have a special thing on game day when you're getting ready, maybe not going on to the plains next Saturday, maybe you're going to be watching at home. How about a game day watch party catered by our friends at Cercheros? It seems like a great idea because you get all the great, fresh, mechs that Cercheros is famous for, a burrito party platter, or perhaps a taco and fajita bar, or maybe some freshly grilled meats like guac and queso, and all your favorite toppings there as well. Plus, there are 25 locations here throughout the great state of Georgia, including right here in Athens, Georgia there as well. It's your game day guarantee for fresh mechs, so you can visit Cercheros.com to find a location near you. That's Cercheros.com and get a great, great catering experience, or just stop in and dine in store or in the restaurant, or maybe get it carried out. But if you want a big-time watch party, catered event, no one's going to do it better for you than our friends at Cercheros. Make sure you find them online at Cercheros.com for a little more on that. All right, I'll give you some scores from around the SEC here coming up in a moment. Let me also kind of pop over and see if I can get a couple of old school comments, because we try not to do a show without doing at least a couple of those there. A lot of Georgia fans kind of weighing in here right now. So a lot of folks having a good time. Army Dog Charlie, good to see him in here there as well. Johnny Surf Dog says, I liked a lot of the play designs tonight, especially the misdirection plays in the red zone. Well done. Yeah, Johnny, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's going to end up being one of the best success stories for Georgia tonight. was the success there in the red zone. Converting those red zone trips into touchdown, that's something that Georgia did pretty well here this evening. David West over on the Facebook side of things mentioning future Georgia opponents, Missouri, Kentucky, he brings up. He says right now it's just Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky as the lone unbeaten teams in the SEC. Yeah, pretty interesting. Missouri's gotten a little bit of chatter because of their win last Saturday against Kansas State. Kentucky, though, has gotten really very little chatter at all. They do beat Vanderbilt today. Now they're 4-0. And it's almost like they've flown completely under the radar all season long. So perhaps both the Missouri and Kentucky games could have a little bit more attention paid to them when they arrive here to play Georgia in a few weeks than perhaps they'd appeared they might on paper. In fact, those teams have a chance to be top 25 teams perhaps there as well. All right, I'm going to get some scores. We'll do this as cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and then we'll get ready to wrap up here on a late Saturday night. Of course, we appreciate all of you being with us here today. Perhaps the biggest story in college football today, kind of a twin billing of big stories. First of all, just moments ago, a late touchdown with just a couple of seconds remaining, just 1 second remaining, by Ohio State puts the Buckeyes up over Notre Dame. They win the game on the road. Low-scoring game, just 17-14. I guess some of the chatter here is that perhaps Notre Dame only had 10 players in the field for that touchdown. So Marcus Freeman, the Irish coach, will have some things to answer for. But Ohio State winning a game in a somewhat uncustomary way here. We're used to seeing Ohio State score a lot of points, be pretty soft on defense. That's certainly what Lou Holtz said he expected from Ohio State, not to be able to match the physicality of Notre Dame. Well, apparently Ohio State used that as motivation. They get the win. They play well defensively, and right now that's a Buckeyes offense that seems like it's still trying to find itself here right now. As far as the rest of the top 25 goes, the other big story from today is the fact that Colorado, the big story involving Deion Sanders. Before the game, Oregon coach Dan Lanning kind of called his shot. He said the Cinderella story was going to end today, and boy, did it. Absolute dominance on the part of Oregon, going out and getting a huge win against Colorado here today. Massive, massive margin of victory for Oregon there in that matchup. 42-6 was the final score. So Dan Lanning and the Ducks get a big, emphatic win, and Lanning had a lot to say both before, during, and after the game about that. Deion has talked about things being personal. For today, Lanning, it seemed like it might be somewhat personal for him. Alabama pulled away and beat Ole Miss 24-10. Obviously, we had kind of said that Lane Kiffin was talking a lot before the game, almost like someone who kind of knew he didn't really have much of a chance to actually win the game and talk when it was over with. Whether that's true or not, clearly there was a lot of dejection on the part of Ole Miss fans and Ole Miss players even. Jackson Dart talked about this. They really thought Alabama was vulnerable, but pretty clearly Ole Miss does not know what it takes to win games of that magnitude. LSU wins late against Arkansas, 34-31 field goal, really almost as time expired. Tennessee finally pulls away from UTSA and wins 45-14. That game is closer for a while. Penn State, during its whiteout game there at Beaver Stadium, gets a shutout 31-0 over Iowa. Anything else to mention here for a moment? Duke gets a win, 41-7 over UConn. Actually has game day coming to Durham for the first time next Saturday as it prepares to host Notre Dame, who just lost in late heartbreaking fashion to Ohio State. And I'll also mention Texas A&M does win today against Auburn. This is an Auburn offense that has a lot of trouble right now. And so if you're Georgia next week, Georgia, it seems like, still has some things to figure out. But based on the way that Auburn's played in its games against Power 5 teams thus far this year, A&M today, Cal on the road a couple of weeks ago, this is a team that if Auburn moves the ball against Georgia after having not really moved it against anybody, that would be somewhat eye-opening. My expectation is that probably will not be the case. One of the things to know about Auburn is there's going to probably be a lot of chatter ahead of next week's game about possibly kind of sticking with Robbie Ashford as the sole quarterback. Right now, Peyton Thorne just does not seem to be the kind of quarterback that Auburn needs him to be, and Hugh Freeze almost always has good quarterbacks pretty clearly right now. That is not what Auburn has in the person of Peyton Thorne. And I think one of the most undercovered stories all year long has been the fact that teams that had a chance to maybe better themselves at the quarterback position in the transfer portal were just not able to do it because a lot of quarterbacks that could have transferred either went somewhere else, Sam Hartman goes to Notre Dame, or didn't transfer at all, such as Drake May at North Carolina. Getting these quarterbacks to come into the SEC this year proved to be kind of a hard thing to do. Transfer portal not very kind to teams in the SEC who needed that. But nonetheless, it's Georgia and Auburn next Saturday, and that is our cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. We had Tony Fanchi here a little earlier, one of our commenters. Tony was a part of our DawgNation cruise, and obviously if you want to be a part of that DawgNation cruise, we'd love to have you there as well. RoyalDogs.com, the website to go to. You can find out how you can be a part of that April of 2024, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, Nassau in the Bahamas, setting sail on a wonderful Oasis-class ship called Allure of the Seas. It's going to be a great, great time. Today's also been a great time there as well. Fun to see the lights turn on at Sanford Stadium. Fun to see the atmosphere of a night game. If you were lucky enough to be here, I hope you're safe driving home and hope you enjoyed that. And thank you for tuning in to our DawgNation post-game show. To our folks here at the UGA Bookstore, thank you for being gracious host to us once again. Michael Carvel back in Atlanta, staying up late to keep us on the air. And Smith and Kaylee and Jay, who are hanging out with us here in person. Appreciate them there as well. Late night, but fun to see Georgia get to 4-0. Still got some stuff to work on. But plenty more weeks in the regular season to try to figure all that out. We'll see you Monday for DawgNation Daily. We'll talk more about that. And then, of course, next Saturday on the road for our DawgNation postgame show after the game as Georgia tries to get to 5-0 by beating Auburn. We will look forward to talking to you then.